On this episode of the Chris Elliott Real Estate Show, we're diving into the home inspection period, the rules of the game, what to know, what to look out for, whether you're buying or selling, and now to the show.
Welcome to the Chris Elliott Real Estate Show, where we bring you insights into the local Central Virginia real estate market, go in-depth to answer your real estate questions and concerns, and interview local figures and influencers in the greater Richmond area. And now, let's get to the latest episode with your host, Chris Elliott, and co-host, Maddie Ray.
Howdy. I am Chris Elliott with the always amazing Maddie Wright. Maddie, how you doing?
I'm well. How are you?
Good. How's your day going?
It's good. It's really good.
You had a nice little, Santa brought you a nice little present today, or you bought yourself something
Yeah,
nice.
on Santa's credit card.
Yeah. Tell me about that. What'd you get?
I got a new laptop.
Hey.
It's beautiful. It's my baby. I ordered 11 stickers from the office.
Oh my God. Not on your company credit card,
No.
I hope.
No. You know with Michael Scott when he's like, mo money, mo problems.
Yeah.
I got us that one so we can remember to like stay humble.
Nice.
Question is, was it a Mac or PC?
It's PC.
Oh, PC. We are not an Apple.
I was going to push for a MacBook, but I decided against it.
Yeah, negative. That's part of the reason I hate Macs is they're good computers, but man, they're expensive.
Yeah, and you can do more on a PC, I think.
No.
Whatever. Mike's a hater. In fairness,
At least I have an iPhone.
your original PC was a POS. It was kind of a junker type.
Yeah.
I went super cheap on that one, and it showed.
Yeah, now this next one is
Basically, he wanted to see if you were going to stick around and if you're going to be able to do the job.
No, literally. That's exactly it. Because even my email address...
It was a test.
My email address didn't even have my first name in it.
Yeah.
I had to work for that.
It was like position at ChrisElliottRealEstate.com. And then I was like, okay, maybe we should treat her like a human, an individual.
Wow, incredible. Imagine that.
Yeah. So treating people like people, that's our internal motto. So anyway, good week.
Good week. I take
Doing
my
good.
test on Friday.
Hey-o. So you're going to be a licensed realtor here pretty soon, or licensed transaction coordinator, we should call it.
Yes. Will not be a real tour.
Do you feel like that's helped you kind of learn the rules of the game and like know what you can do, what you can't do, kind of giving you a broader scope of your job?
In the beginning, it was more like I pretty much had a clear idea of what I could do and what I couldn't. And I stood by that like really firmly because,
Because I drilled that into you.
Right. And also because I didn't know any better. I just did things because you told me to, and I didn't do things because you didn't tell me to. And
now
then
she's
I was
going
like,
to question you.
Yeah.
No, that's not the point.
Just like last episode. Hey, let me throw out this hypothetical
No.
example to you.
The point is, now it gets muddled sometimes because I feel like I know the answers to things, so I can do it, and then I have to remind myself, wait a minute, can't do that. And then I stop myself from doing the thing that I'm not supposed to do. So now I can do the things that I originally wasn't supposed to do.
I think we need to bring up this scenario that happened the other day that I kind of messed up on at a listing for you guys on the key situation. But
yeah, let's talk about that.
Let's throw Mike under the bus.
Let's talk about that, Mike. I heard you put some undue stress and
it was actually
fight.
It was actually a little bit of a learning thing for you, actually.
It's a teaching moment.
It was a teaching moment.
All right, so let's talk about what happened. Mike locked Maddie out of a lockbox.
Let's start off from
Let's talk about how bad Central Lock is.
Yeah, tell us your perspective on this.
So on the porch, she laid everything properly the way she was probably supposed to do it. I needed to take a picture and video.
The work. It was the work.
So
he needed to do a job.
I moved it out of the way, and the central lock that was left open. It was turned. Well, yeah, for the client to put the key in, and that's probably what you were going to tell them to do. And
not quite.
That's some.
It was.
I'm just kidding. I'm just messing with you.
I like how he's framing the story. It was left open. I had a job to do,
and it flipped
by itself.
Well, Central Lock does that. In your defense, Central Lock will just be
they're a little...
forget you and close. Whereas Supra, you pulled the thing out from the bottom.
But
there was no way it could do that.
Like, I have multiple clients that give me access on a time-to-time day.
I've got multiple clients that do it this way.
That we've been doing for 2.5 months.
We've been doing it forever.
Well, no, my problem was this all started because I thought I was going to have to bring the lockbox back from Midlothian to Glen Allen, have you open it, and then drive all the way back out and drop it off. That was why all this started.
You were thinking like the old days with, basically that a agent is the only one that's allowed to have access, and now it's not that way anymore. Yeah. And so I was trying to convince Chris.
And I will say, we as agents have to give certain people permission. It's not just anybody can come along.
Yeah, it's a vendor.
We don't want people thinking that.
So, a lot of times I'll have an app, the app that we use, it'll tell me, hey, you have this time to this time access or whatever.
All right. You're cutting into my studio time with your excuses here.
Well, I didn't even know if that would work on a listing that wasn't active yet. That's why I was stressing.
Okay. All right.
It all worked out.
Yeah, it all worked out.
Teaching moment.
All's well that ends well. All right. So let's get into the content for today. Maddie, what are we talking about today?
We are explaining the inspection period.
Yes, we are. So here's what we're going to do for you guys today. We are going to read, we're not going to be able to get to all of it, but we're going to read the better portion of the contract. So we're actually I'm going to have Maddie, in her lovely serenading, soothed voice, read the actual portions of the contract, and then we're going to explain a couple points. We're going to talk about things to know, things to be aware of, just so you guys can hear it from the horse's mouth.
I'm a horse now?
Not calling, the expression.
First of all, my life is not worth a lowball offer. Now I'm a horse.
Insert horse sound. Yeah. Okay. All right. Moving on. So, hey, the home inspection period, probably one of the most stressful and contentious parts of any transaction. If a deal is going to fall apart, generally it's the home inspection in which it falls apart. Not that it happens too often, but when it does, it's usually over that. And something to know, there's 2 points of negotiation in the Central Virginia contract. There's before a contract is ratified. So when a buyer makes an initial offer, and then you're going back and forth on price and terms. And then when it comes to a home inspection, those are the two parts that are pretty much part of any transaction that we do. So that's kind of the basis point here. So, all right. So we're jumping into the Central Virginia template contract. We printed out just a sample contract. And I'm going to have Maddie read. So this is section 16 where it spells out the property inspection. Maddie, if you can start at the top and just read the highlighted section there.
Sure. Seller hereby grants the purchaser the right to have the property inspected by a licensed home inspector or other person or persons selected by purchaser at purchaser's expense, and to request repair of defects revealed and/or a seller paid closing cost credit to purchaser. Parentheses.
What does that mean?
What?
What'd you just read?
Oh, it just means if that box is checked, then that the seller allows the purchaser to do their home inspection.
Yes.
I don't know why you're laughing at me.
At the very elementary level, yes, that is true. So there is an option where you can waive the home inspection. We typically don't recommend that. Most people are going to want a home inspection, even if it's for informational purposes only. But a couple of things there. So the contract was revised in August of 2017. You can see it right there on the contract, where they inputted that little section about a licensed home inspector. Home inspectors in Virginia actually didn't have to be licensed until a couple of years ago. I forget exactly when it was, but a lot of them had certifications. They had belonged to different groups or whatever that said, hey, we're legitimate, but they are now a licensed trade, just like a realtor, just like a contractor, just like a hairdresser at the state level. So what the contract is doing is they're really trying, when the attorneys put this together, they're really trying to promote licensed home inspectors and get away from folks just bringing in like a contractor or Uncle Larry who's going to give his analysis on the property. And if you're somebody that's buying a property, you definitely want a licensed home inspector in there, just because there's certain qualifications they have to even do that inspection. But also just from a is legitimacy?
That's a word, yeah.
That is? Okay,
yes.
That sounds like something I would have just made up. But
ding, ding, ding.
Yeah, thanks. So from that standpoint, you if you're going to make a case that, hey, XYZ needs to be fixed, or we need X amount on the property, you want to have somebody that's professional behind that. Home inspectors, looked it up. They've actually got to get about 70 hours of approved training and 25. So they have to do 70 hours of approved training, which is more training than a license. How many hours was your real estate exam? Was it like 60?
60, yeah.
Yeah.
And then you have to do PLE, which is 30.
Okay. But like 60 to get licensed.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they've got to do 70 hours, and they've got to do 25 home inspections under direct supervision of a certified home inspector. So, yeah, 70 hours of classroom time and then 25 inspections under another home inspector. So, I've had some home inspectors that maybe weren't the sharpest tools in the shed sometimes, but, I hear people talk about home inspectors are idiots. They're going through a fair amount of training to be able to get that license. So anyway, so that's that. The other points in there, the home inspection is always at whose expense? Miss Maddie, right?
The purchaser's expense.
The purchasers. That is correct. So as a buyer, per our contract, you cannot request that a seller does an inspection or that the seller foots the bill for the inspection.
Do people ever try?
Yeah. So here's what we see. Thanks for that softball of a question.
Oh, you're welcome.
So here's what we'll see is buyer will do a home inspection. Let's say there's, some cracks in the foundation that are revealed. And the home inspector, refers that and says, hey, you guys really need to get a structural engineer to come in and give a professional opinion. So what happens is a buyer will say, well, we don't, we've already spent the $500 on the home inspection. We don't want to spend more money, and then find out there's an issue. So we're going to tell the seller that, if they want to keep this together, they've got to do, get the engineer out there for $300 or whatever it is. Per our contract, the buyer is always responsible for the cost of the inspection. So just something to be aware of. And then the other portion of that is that so a buyer can request repairs to the property. They can request closing cost in lieu of repairs. So they can say, hey, we want a credit in lieu of these repairs. Or they can request a combination of the two, like, hey, we want X, Y, and Z fixed, and then we want a couple bucks for, A, B, and C. Does that all make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. And I think we hit pretty much everything there. Maddie, can you read the next section?
Sure. Inspections may include, but are not limited to, all structural and building components and systems, radon gas, underground storage tanks, soil condition, environmental testing, and engineering studies.
Correctamundo. What does that mean in layman's terms?
In layman's terms, it means there's a whole slew of different kinds of inspections that they can do. So one thing we do often is the radon inspections. So that is permissible per the contract.
Permissible.
Permissible.
That's an SAT word. So pretty much the buyer has the right to look at the house soup to nuts, whether it's radon, whether it's a structural inspection. And we get it. Sometimes we'll have clients, either our clients or, they're the sellers and we're representing the buyers, where the seller would be like, come on, man, like, isn't this enough? You already got the home inspection. Now you're bringing somebody else out here. It's kind of a pain in the butt to have somebody come in at a separate time for a radon. But at the end of the day, the rules of the game, kind of the black and white of the contract of what you've signed up for, if you've taken an offer, is you've agreed to let that buyer do pretty much any and all inspections that they want to do during that period. So sometimes they're not all at the same time, just lining different people up. But as a seller, you have agreed to let them come in and do those multiple different inspections. And the other point, we kind of alluded to it before, sometimes follow-up inspections are needed. So what will happen a lot of times is a home inspector is somewhat of a generalist. So they'll come in and they'll say, hey, there's certain things within the scope of what they can call, a defect, not a defect. But sometimes there's things like, HVAC issues, like irrigation systems, like structural issues, where they're not going to make a final call, but they'll say, hey, this is probably something that you need to get a specialist out to look at. So sometimes that's where those follow-up inspections are coming from, is, there's a crack in the foundation. The inspector can't say whether it's an issue or not. So you're bringing out a structural engineer to kind of, drop the verdict as far as, is it an issue? Is it not an issue? What is it going to take to fix? And so on and so forth. Any questions on that?
No.
Negative.
However, but if a home inspector does say, like, he defers something to someone else, that means that he is acting within the scope of his expertise.
Oh!
Boom. I am prepared for Friday.
Did we just learn that?
No.
Nice.
Maybe.
I just read that last night. Okay.
Stop.
Cool. All right. Moving on.
Okay. The term defects, as used in this paragraph 16, shall mean a condition which impairs the normal stability, safety, or use of any improvements, buildings on the property, or damage to any part of the improvements, but shall exclude any cosmetic flaws, antiquated systems, or grandfathered components that are in working order, but would not comply with current building code if constructed or installed today.
How do you feel about that?
I have a question.
Yes. You only get 3 questions.
Well...
And I think you used one earlier today, so...
Shoot. So how come in the inspection part of the contract it says it can't...
How come?
Oh my gosh, Chris Elliott.
Hi, Bo.
Oh my gosh.
How come?
I'm never speaking again.
Yep.
Why is it that the contract says that it excludes cosmetic flaws, but on an appraisal and they can come back and say things like, oh, there's cracking paint on the railings, you need to fix that?
What had happened was, no. So good question. Very good question. So we've got 2 different things here. So this contract, and this is a section of a contract, but this contract, who are the principals of the contract, Maddie?
Oh, the buyer and seller.
The buyer and seller. So they are really the only parties involved within this contract. The buyer has made certain promises and agreed to certain things. The seller has made certain promises and agreed to certain things. Who is not part of this contract?
Oh, the lender.
The lender, right. So the lender could give a rat's tail.
Good catch.
Yeah. PG-13. The lender could care less what anybody's agreed to in the contract, number one, because they're not party to the contract, and number two, they're the one with the money. So usually the folks with the money set the rules, in my experience. But no, what the scenario you're talking about there. So this contract spells out what a buyer can and cannot ask for, specifically this section. When it comes to issues on an appraisal, that is a different story because the lender is saying that, hey, this issue, while chipping paint may be a cosmetic thing by the definition of our contract, the lender could see that as a safety hazard because, you know, if somebody has chipping paint and then a baby or a kid walks up and eats the paint chips, that's an issue for them.
That sounds like a parenting issue.
It is a parenting issue. The scary thing is kids have died from that. So, and with the lender's actually following FHA or VA or VHDA guidelines there. So, not to get in the weeds, but that is something completely separate because that's something that a lender is coming back on an appraisal saying, hey, I don't care what you guys have agreed to or not agreed to. We're not going to lend the money on this property until X, Y, and Z are fixed. And that's typically, you know, safety issues, broken windows, loose handrails, missing handrails, chipping paint, things of that nature. Couple things to point out. So I always think it's funny in a contract when something is in bold, and when they talk about defects, that is in bold, which typically means the attorneys want people to know, hey, this is something worth reading. If you're not going to read the whole contract, read this section here.
Most of that paragraph is bold.
Yeah. Well, they put a lot of emphasis on it because they don't want anybody being able to come back. And anytime an attorney puts something in bold in a contract, they just don't want the other party to come back and be like, oh, I don't know what's in there. But no, our contract very clearly states what is a defect and what is not. And the reason it's in bold is because this is always a hot topic when we're negotiating repairs, because you'll have buyers that will come back and they'll say, hey, you know, we don't like that the, you know, behind the TV is not painted the same color as the wall. Well, that's great, but that's a cosmetic flaw. That's outside of what we've agreed to in the contract. We'll see buyers that will come back and they will say, hey, you know, that's a really old HVAC system there. You know, we want that replaced or we want a credit towards that. Well, at the end of the day, it says right in black and white ink, that's an antiquated system. And as long as it's in good working order, then there's nothing really you can ask. You can't say, hey, I need the roof replaced because the roof is old, or I need the water heater replaced because it's old. If it's still working, it's still working. So it's outside the scope of what a buyer can technically ask for. The other thing there is grandfathered components. So a good example of that is like GFCI outlets in a kitchen. Do you know about GFCI outlets?
No.
That's not in the real estate test.
Well, if it is, then I'm going to fail.
Yeah. Study up. No, it basically is just it's current building code that if you have an outlet near water, it needs to be on a GFCI circuit. That came out in like the 80s.
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
But if you got a house that was built...
Good contribution, Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Mike.
Well, I thought he was going to go into something else, but yes.
Yeah. But long story short, if the house was built before that became code and you haven't renovated that portion of the house, then it falls under that grandfather components. In other words, you can't hold a 1950s house to the standards of, the building standards of 2000. So that's kind of what's outside of the scope of the inspection. That talks about that there. Any questions on that? I think we kind of beat that one to death.
Yeah, that's beaten to death, I think.
Cool. All right, let's move on.
Okay. Seller shall respond in writing to purchaser's repair request within 7 days of its receipt. The negotiation period. If seller
You totally skipped a whole...
No, I didn't.
Yes, you did.
No, I didn't.
Oh, no, you didn't. Never mind. I'm sorry.
Wow. Rude. Before I was interrupted.
Starting from the top.
Okay. Seller shall respond in writing to purchaser's repair request within 7 days of its receipt. The negotiation period. If seller agrees in writing to accept such repair request, then the party shall proceed to settlement. If seller does not respond in writing within the negotiation period, then seller shall be deemed to have rejected purchaser's repair request.
Cool. Did you say 10 days? Or did you just...
I thought I said 7.
Okay.
If I said 10, I mean 7.
Okay. All right. Well, that's
I
good.
feel like she needs to rap when she reads it.
I need to rap.
Can we get you to rap this? On our next episode, Maddie's going to sing parts of the contract.
Yes.
So
Don't make promises I can't keep.
Facebook, Instagram.
Oh, I have laryngitis for the next week.
Facebook, Instagram. Tell us what style, what genre of music. Do you want it opera style? Do you want it country music?
Oh my god.
Do you want it
Country music.
Do you want a jazz style? All right. No. So this section of the inspection period thing we talk about. So what's spelled out here is the time frame of the inspection. So typical time frames that we see on inspection periods, anywhere from, let's say, 10 to 14 days, sometimes maybe 15 days if they're stretching. And essentially what it says is that, hey, you as a buyer have whatever time frame that we agree to, 10 days, 14 days, you have 10 to 14 days or whatever period you agree to, you have that a period to come in, do any and all inspections that you want, and submit to us your request for repairs. Now, they have to, if and when they submit a request for repairs, they've got to have 3 things turned in. They've got to have the actual request for repairs, and there's an addendum that we use for that, the repairs request addendum. So they've got to have a written instrument. What's a legal instrument, Maddie? Come on now.
The contract
is a version of a legal instrument.
The ratified contract.
Never mind. All right. So you've got to deliver a written addendum essentially saying this is what we want to see fixed, or this is the money that we want in lieu of actual repairs. They've got to submit a inspection report.
What happens if they don't submit an inspection report?
Well, the third thing that they've got to submit is a estimate of what the repairs are going to cost. So typically we'll put that in the addendum, or most of your inspectors will give an estimate of what the actual repair is going to cost. Whether they're asking for repairs or credits, they need to put all 3 of those components. If they do not submit all 3 of those components within that time frame, the contract very clearly states they have agreed to accept the property as is, i.e., you have lost, do not pass go, do not collect $200.
Womp, womp, womp.
Yeah. So we had a deal, if you remember that townhouse in Mechanicsville that we sold earlier this year, the buyer's agent submitted to us a repairs addendum. It had exactly what they wanted to fix. It had the estimate of the repairs, but he forgot to send the inspection addendum. Do you remember that one?
I think that was before me. But there was one that we had where someone almost forgot, and we were like, "Oh my gosh, are they going to forget?" And
yeah.
But I think I know which one you're talking about, and I think that
Waxcomb.
repairs were. Oh, that was wax.
You were around for Waxcomb.
Yeah.
You remember that one?
I was thinking poplar bud.
I can't remember that one, but so Waxcomb is pretty cool.
That's right. I forgot.
The agent sent everything over. We're not obligated to reach out to them and say, "Hey, you forgot to send this over." I mean, we've got a fiduciary responsibility to our client, so we literally waited until the inspection period passed. We went back to him the next day. Hey, got your addendum. Appreciate you sending it over. Hey, whether you forgot or whatever, sorry, but you guys forgot to send over the repairs addendum. Therefore, we're not obligated to.
How'd that go over?
The agent was not happy. I mean, it was his mistake. So, we were kind of graceful in our response.
In our delivery of that.
Yeah, we didn't rub it in his face. But at the end of the day, we're like, hey, I'm not going to tell my client he needs to fix anything. We want the deal to go through. But at the end of the day, you guys screwed up. So luckily, it wasn't a lot of that came back on it. It was pretty light, repairs addendum. So I think I don't know what happened. I don't know if the buyer ate it. I don't know if the agent gave their client some money or what the deal was. But long story short, we went to closing and our client didn't even have to fix anything. So that was kind of cool.
Yeah.
The other component of this little section here, the last thing we'll hit on, a buyer does, if they were requesting repairs, they do have the right to request that licensed contractors do the work. This is also a relatively new change in the last couple of years. It's something, 2-3 years ago, we as agents used to always write that in there because, you don't want a John Q homeowner going out and fixing an AC unit or doing intricate electrical repairs or, stuff like that. So we used to always write into our addendums, hey, we want a licensed contractor to do this. And it was one of those kind of things we knew we couldn't really do it, but we would just do it anyway. But that was an amendment to our contract a couple years ago of, hey, a buyer certainly does have a right to request that licensed contractors do certain repairs. So we typically try to do that for our clients, at least for, your more intricate electrical, HVAC, plumbing, if it's more difficult or anything to do with a crawl space. We typically want a licensed person out there. Just so you don't have somebody like Maddie, in a crawl space taking care of molds.
You wouldn't even send me into a Best Buy to talk about computers. I don't know what I'm talking about.
I did send you into a Best Buy to talk about computers.
And I had no idea what I was talking about.
It almost didn't go good. But she ended up with the right laptop, so that's all that matters.
She comes out with the refrigerator.
Yeah. They had a deal going on, microwaves. I just couldn't miss out. I have sent Maddie to some questionable properties.
Yeah, like I drove through the ghetto the other day and almost died.
Well, that was because you didn't know how to navigate your route properly.
That's because I don't have an easy pass.
She was driving, or we probably shouldn't mention the neighborhood, but
no,
it wasn't.
I shouldn't have said that.
Or ghetto.
It wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't a desirable neighborhood. It was kind of sketch, but I did buy you mace. That was like one of the first things I gave you, which I don't know if that was the best like forewarning of, hey, this is what this job's going to be. Here's some mace.
Well, one of the first places you sent me was next to the airport, and you bought me the mace before that. So I was expecting like...
And that wasn't that bad.
No, it wasn't bad.
Yeah.
Especially comparatively speaking.
Yeah, compared to the other ones, of which we're not going to name. So
nope.
Anyway. All right, moving on. Let's read the next section.
Okay. If by 5 p.m. on the 7th day of the negotiation period, no final agreement is reached as to the repair request, then purchaser shall have until 5 p.m. on the second day after the end of the negotiation period to either terminate this agreement by written notice to seller or accept in writing seller's last offer regarding the repair request and proceed to settlement. If purchaser terminates this agreement or fails to notify seller of its election within the said 2-day period, then this agreement shall terminate, and subject to the provisions of paragraph 8, purchaser's deposit shall be refunded in full to the purchaser, and neither party shall have any further obligation hereunder.
I think you jumped. Okay. Anyway.
Where did I jump?
I think you read section 5, but we're going to end at the negotiation period. This is where it kind of gets a little bit interesting on the contract. Here, take that one. This is where it kind of gets interesting on the contract. So now we're talking about the 7-day negotiation period. So the way our contracts work is once a buyer submits their repairs request, it then kicks off a 7-day negotiation period in which essentially if an agreement is not reached at 5 p.m. on the 7th day, then the buyer has the right to terminate. But let's talk about the 7-day negotiation period. It's essentially allowed to, so once you submit a repairs request, it's really designed to allow a seller some time to kind of absorb the information because most sellers don't know, what's wrong with their house. That's why we always recommend getting a home inspection before you list. But most people don't know kind of what defects are lying under the surface in their house. So it allows them to kind of read through that, get some quotes if they want to actually get quotes versus just running off of what the home inspector's estimates are, or to kind of formulate a counter of, hey, we're not going to do the 7 things you asked, but we're willing to do the 4. So there's no real time frame within that 7-day period in which a seller has to get back to you. But if they do not get back to you by the end of that 7-day period, then essentially the buyer has the right to walk. Anytime just like when we're negotiating offers before they're ratified, any type of counter offer or offer negates the previous offer. So in other words, if I offer, if I say, hey, I want X, Y, and Z fixed, and you say I'm only willing to fix X, but I'm not going to do Y and Z, and then I say, no, you can't come back and say, hey, I'm going to take you up at X, Y, and Z. It basically takes that off of the table. So that's just kind of just regular contract negotiation. A couple of things there. A purchase or a seller cannot force a credit on a purchaser. So if a purchaser wants certain things fixed, and the seller says, you know what, I don't want to have to do the work, but I'll give you the money, or I'll give you this money. And the buyer says, no, I actually want those things fixed. The seller cannot say, hey, Mr. Buyer, we're going to force this credit upon you. We're giving you the money that it says. In other words, they can't. Am I saying that correctly? Is that making sense?
Yes.
Okay.
You can't pressure them into. Well, I mean, you can pressure, but you can't force.
Yeah, you can pressure, but you can't force. That sounds. Yeah. I'm going to leave that one alone. Moving on. And during the 7-day negotiation period, neither party. This is another SAT word. Neither party.
Neither or party.
Neither party can unilaterally terminate. What does unilaterally mean, Maddie?
One-sidedly.
Whoa. So basically what that means is during that 7-day negotiation period, neither party can just say, you know what, I'm done. This is not working out. I want out. Now, both parties can agree that, hey, we're not moving forward. But if one party is still trying to work it out and another party wants to cancel, nobody can basically just jump out on their own during that 7-day negotiation period. And that's kind of designed to that keeps a lot of deals together, because you would be surprised how many people kind of come around after a day or two of like, they're offended by whatever offer, counter offer, but you give them a night to sleep on it. You give them 2 days. They sober up, whatever it is, and they're ready to, come back to the table, so to speak. All right, so that's the 7-day negotiation period. Do you feel like we hit that adequately?
Yes.
Do we answer all of your questions?
Yes.
Cool. All right.
I have Facebook Live questions, but we'll get to those.
We'll get to those in the fire round.
Dun,
all right.
Dun, dun.
So last but not least, let's read the last section here about the super secret, not often talked about, but always present 2-day layover period.
Okay. That part?
Yes, the one with the 5.
Oh, okay.
After the 4.
Okay. If by 5 p.m. on the 7th day of the negotiation period, no final agreement is reached as to the repair request, then purchaser shall have until 5 p.m. on the 2nd day after the end of the negotiation period to either terminate this agreement by written notice to seller or accept in writing seller's last offer regarding the repair request and proceed to settlement. If purchaser terminates this agreement or fails to notify seller of its election within the said 2-day period, then this agreement shall terminate, and subject to the provisions of paragraph 8, purchaser's deposit shall be refunded in full to purchaser, and neither party shall have any further obligation hereunder.
Hereunder. Okay.
That was as close as I come to rapping, by the way, just so we're all clear.
Nice. Well, we're going to have to stick with opera then. All right. So this is where it kind of gets interesting whenever we hit the spot, because we always tell our clients, hey, there's a 7-day negotiation period. And it's not that we're trying to like hide this 2-day period, but it's one of those things that doesn't get discussed or it doesn't come up often. And then, sometimes it can catch folks by surprise. But anyway, so the scenario here is we're on the 7th day of the negotiation period. Both sides are going back and forth, or one side or both sides have become unresponsive, and now we've passed 5 p.m. It's 5:01 on the 7th day. So people think, oh, hey, well, the contract's done. No, not necessarily. Now we're in a 2-day layover period, and it's kind of interesting because essentially all of the power sits, or all the decision power sits in the buyer's hands. So after 5 p.m. at the 7th day, within that 2-day period, a buyer can do a couple things. They can terminate the contract. So they can say, hey, you did not accept our last offer or last counteroffer. We haven't come to an agreement. We're just going to terminate. And that they can unilaterally do that. And the contract is basically terminated, null and void. Everybody goes their separate ways. They can accept the seller's last written offer. So the seller can make one last offer of, hey, this is our last offer. And within that 2-day period, the buyer can accept that. And if nobody does anything, because sometimes folks just get non-responsive or they get offended or whatever, but if nobody's talking, if nobody does anything by 5 p.m. on the end of the second day, so essentially the 9th day of the negotiation period, quote unquote, the contract actually terminates itself. So that way, because we don't want to have a contract just kind of lingering out there that stays in place because nobody does anything, which sometimes happens when folks get, upset. So at that point, the contract terminates itself, and it very specifically says that the purchaser's earnest money gets returned to the purchaser. That's one of the things sometimes sellers get a little, ornery about, especially if a negotiation fails, is, hey, we just tied up the property for X amount of time, and the purchaser gets to walk away with all their money. Of course, they've spent time and money, in the transaction as well with inspections and time sitting on the sidelines, but that's it. So that was the inspection period explained. Do you feel like we kind of went through that ad nauseum?
At what?
Ad nauseum. Isn't that a word? Ad nauseum? Like in too much detail? Is that a word, Mike?
No. I think you're looking for maybe exhausted.
Can we look this up?
No.
I don't even know how you spell it. Is it Latin?
Whoa.
Ad nauseum?
Ad nauseum. Is that not a word? Facebook, is that not a word?
We don't have any viewers.
We're gonna look this up, and we're coming back. Come on now. Joe Rogan's producer looks stuff up while he's on his podcast.
Are you Joe Rogan?
I'm not Joe Rogan. No.
We'll get back to you.
All right, we'll get back to that.
Ad nauseum.
Episode 704, ad nauseum. I'm pretty sure it's a word. Anyway, all right. So now it is time for the fire round.
Dun, dun, dun.
We have to pause.
Oh.
Our production team told us. Our production team told us how to pause. And now we've actually got the sound effect, and then we've got us talking about a pause that no longer exists. So
okay,
anyway,
wait, pause.
We already did the pause. Okay. All right. I can't hold this mic that's falling over any longer. But talk to me. What questions do we get from the socials, from the interwebs?
Okay. First of all, is one that I actually had. So
I'm sure it'd be great.
Wow. Okay. I sat in on a home inspection little class thing at Remax Action
yesterday.
Tuesday. I was going to say Tuesday, but that was yesterday. Anyway, so someone had said that if they go to a house and they happen to see like cracks in the foundation or like stuff like that, they will put like, this needs to be fixed in the additional terms of the contract before it gets ratified. Is that something that you would do?
Yeah, good question. So this is not necessarily, I think where they were going with this is, so if we see that there are issues apparent with a house, clearly apparent, before we've even ratified a contract, like if we know the roof shot or something, is whatever, or if I know like, hey, it's going to be a tough negotiation, so I want to make sure we get this addressed up front. In our initial offer, we'll say, hey, we're going to offer you X amount, but included with this, we want the roof replaced.
Yeah,
or we want, yeah. So you can do that in a initial offer. You can just have that be, in the terms of the initial offer. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. I just mean, is that something that you would do?
Yeah. It all depends on the situation, but yes, it's better to address major issues like that up front versus having your client contract a house, spend $300, $400, $500 on a home inspection, spend all that time and energy, and then just find out that the seller's not willing to fix it.
Yeah. Good point.
Yes.
Okay. So what do you do if a buyer is asking for repairs on items that are not technically defects? Bold defects in quotations.
Yep. Depends who I'm representing. My position, if I'm representing the seller, is that I go back to the agent and I say, hey, look, you and I know, or maybe you don't know, but let me remind you, I hate that crap. But I go back to them and I say, hey, look, this is outside of the terms of the contract. We all agreed to the rules of the game here. It's in the pre-printed contract. One of my favorite, I learned this line from Gary Duda, my broker, is he'll go back to the buyer's agent and he'll say, hey, you were the one that wrote the contract. Because it's true. I'm in the buyer's agent.
Wow.
Yeah. It's kind of like a little jab. But no, we go back to him and just remind him, hey, this is what we agreed to. So you got to apply a little pressure. At the end of the day, if a buyer wants to back out and they're backing out legitimate reasons, the only way to really hold their feet to the fire is to take them to court, and then it's for a judge to decide. But yeah, I always just try to remind folks that this is what we agreed to. If we have a buyer client, it's a little tougher because we represent them. We want them to know we're in their corner, but at the same time, we want to keep them out of a legal landmine, so to speak. So we just remind them, hey, this is what we've agreed to. If it's somewhat gray, I mean, we always err on the side of the argument on their side. But
because you have a fiduciary duty to them,
fiduciary responsibility. But yeah, I mean, we always try to be upfront with our clients of like, hey, if you want me to write this in there, I'll write this in there. But at the end of the day, this is what we agreed to in the contract, and this is what they're probably going to say when we ask for stuff that we've agreed not to ask for.
Okay.
This is a very long-winded answer to a short question.
It was an ad nauseum answer.
Yeah, ad nauseum. There we go. Have you looked that up yet? God,
how do you spell it? Is it Latin? It sounds Latin.
What are we paying for here?
Ad nauseum. Is it like 2 words?
I think it's Latin.
That was my.
Do you know what caveat emptor means?
I sure do.
Talk to me about it.
It's in the responsibility of the buyer. So like, we're in Virginia. We are a caveat emptor state.
Yes.
So the seller doesn't have to be like, okay, there's this. Like the buyer has to seek these things out for themselves, like certain things. And that kind of ties
a
flood zone.
Yes. So that kind of ties into the conversation today. Virginia is a caveat emptor state, which is Latin for buyer beware. I think it's like the only Latin I know.
That's the one thing I didn't remember.
Which essentially means that the law very much favors sellers as far as what they, there's not much a seller has to disclose in Virginia. They have to disclose written building code violations, written zoning violations. And then if the house is built before 1978, they have to disclose whether they have any knowledge of lead-based paint or reports pertaining to lead-based paint. Fun facts, you do not have to disclose. Oh, you have to disclose if you've cooked methamphetamines in a house.
And it wasn't cleaned properly.
Yeah, so just make sure
if it's cleaned properly.
When you go to sell your house, just make sure to
clean up after yourself.
Well, disclose the fact that you got a little side hustle.
I respect the side hustle,
Moving on.
Gotta make ends meet somehow. Can't a buyer just get out of a contract if they don't like what comes up on the inspections?
Good question. Negative. So that's something that we deal with, especially if folks have bought and sold real estate in other areas, if they're, first-time home buyers or they're just from another area. Real estate's very local. Every area, every state is different. But in our Central Virginia contract, as a buyer, you can't just back out if you don't like the results of the home inspection unless your contract specifically says that. But, the majority of the times, no, you have to give the seller the opportunity to correct any defects, or you have to give them the opportunity to fix it.
Or they could just wait out until they get to that 2-day layover period if they wanted to be like that, right?
If who wanted to be like that?
The buyer.
Yeah, but they still have to submit a request for repairs. In other words, they can't just say, we don't like it, we want out. They've got to submit what they've actually found. And if the seller fixes it or, gives them the credit or whatever, they're on the hook. They've bought the house, essentially.
Good to know.
Yeah.
All right. One last thing.
Yes.
If something is missed on the... weird. If something is missed on the home inspection, what recourse does a buyer have? That's a good word, recourse.
Yeah, recourse. So if something is missed on the home inspection, so unfortunately not much. Most of your home inspectors are going to have you sign off on something like a waiver that just says, hey, we're going to do a rest job, but at the end of the day, you can't hold us responsible. Our contracts say you can't sue the agent.
Hope you pick a good home inspector then.
Yeah, pick a good home inspector. Go with whoever your realtor recommends because they're typically a good option. And then, so we have this sometimes, like a buyer will come back at the final walkthrough and they'll say, hey, we didn't realize X, Y, and Z was wrong with the house. Well, in our contract, you only get one bite at the apple. So if there was damage done to a property between, the home inspection and closing, that's a different story. But if they just missed something, then, they missed it. Cavity emptor, buyer beware. So once again, it's a seller-sided state that we live in. So the buyer does not have any recourse.
Womp womp. Buyer needs to do their due diligence.
At that point, unless the agent had knowledge of a defect and didn't disclose it. But the homeowner is not required to disclose it. But the agent, if they're made aware, they're required to disclose it.
Yes.
All right. Anything else?
That's all I got.
Cool. Well, thank you guys so much for tuning in to episode number 3. So we want to know from you guys what you guys want to hear. We're trying to format what these episodes are going to be. We're going to have on some local guests, vendors. We'd like to get on some local figures. We're going to do one show a month. That's going to be a market update. So next week, we're going to be talking about the state of the market, state of the union.
Yeah, those are my favorite.
Yeah. So that's what we're going to be talking about. But we want to know what you guys think, what you guys want, so we can cater to you. So follow us on social. Give us a review if you can. Once again, thanks for tuning in, and we will catch you guys on the next one.
Thanks for joining us for the Chris Elliott Real Estate Show. If you have any questions or suggestions for future episodes, please contact Chris Elliott at chris@chriselliottrealestate.com or by phone at 804-980-1898. And please join us again next time for the Chris Elliott Real Estate Show.